along to episode 3 of the Midweek F1 podcast. This is your new hump day cure, shall we say. It's the last look at the race just gone and the first look at the F1 race coming up. Now, I'm Nicola Hume, and as always, I am joined by the Formula One walking encyclopedia that is Ben Edwards.
Thank you very much. And what a great show we've got to look forward to. First of all, we'll be concentrating on all the fun and games in China that took place. There's a lot to talk about in that second race of the season so far.
Now, obviously, there was some very sad news last week. We lost an absolute legend of the sport. We lost Eddie Jordan. Now, it's only fair that we pay tribute to him in this episode. Now, I know, Ben, that you worked with him over the years. Producer Jim worked with him over the years. And our special guest on today's show also worked with EJ during his Jordan Grand Prix days. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit later on.
We'll also have our We Need to Talk About section where we go into the teams and drivers that may be under pressure. Right now, there's really only one driver that's particularly under pressure.
Yep, and then we're going to talk about our midweek F1 championship of the entire world. How did we get on points after the Chinese Grand Prix? I can tell you now, little teaser, Ben's not doing so well.
Definitely not. No surprise. Of course, we'll dive into what's coming up next, which is the Japanese Grand Prix in a week and a half. And there'll be lots to look forward to in all of that as well. The 2025 F1 World Championship already fighting. So there's lots to look forward to.
But first up, he's done it. Oscar Piastri has done it. Now, on last week's podcast, we were all kind of rooting for him. I mean, we have been since the season started. And it was a brilliant, brilliant race from Oscar. And then obviously we had the first sprint race weekend as well, which we have a lot to unpick. So, as usual, producer Jim, what are we talking about?
I want to talk about probably the worst job in the pit lane at the moment, which is Lewis Hamilton's race engineer. Let's talk about the ups and downs of that. Discuss.
Oh, Lewis. I mean, that was a wild ride for Lewis this weekend.
It was a real up and down weekend, which you get in racing sometimes. The up, of course, was taking pole and then winning the sprint race.
Yeah.
First ever sprint race he's had. First sprint win for Ferrari. Great, fantastic. And then, it all dipped straight back down for the Grand Prix itself. Both cars disqualified. They weren't fighting for podiums, really, in the end. So it really was an up and down weekend.
I mean, the disqualification as well was over like 0.4 of a millimetre, but I guess they have to draw the line somewhere, don't they? You have to have the rules there for a reason, and they didn't quite make it right, so that's why Lewis was disqualified. And then Charles Leclerc, if I'm right, they were saying the weight wasn't right because there wasn't enough water in the car, is what I read this morning.
Oh, really? Water?
Yeah.
Well, you see, it is engineering side of this is very challenging because you want to make the car to the absolute limit in terms of weight. Any extra weight slows the car down. But to be able to assess that when you're doing a long race, and they didn't get any safety car periods, so of course they burnt up all the fuel they would have allowed for. In fact, probably had to back off a couple of times just to save a little bit of fuel to make sure they didn't use too much. Tyre wear, if you're not making 2 pit stops, if you only make 1, then of course you'll worn the tyre out even more, so the weight can be reduced. It's an incredibly demanding, and you think, it must be easy not to break the rules, but actually it's incredibly demanding to get the car right to the limit without going over the top. But 2 teams, Ferrari and Alpine, made a mess on that. They both got done for being underweight.
Can I ask you a question? Have I got this right in thinking that the FIA randomly select 3 cars to check at
Normally.
the end of every race? So they randomly selected 3 cars?
Yeah, but if you're in the points, then they often do check all the cars. So it does depend on the system.
So it was just, they didn't randomly select those 3 and all 3 happened to be
No, I think in that case they would have taken those cars that have won points and make sure they're all okay.
Right, okay, makes sense. Producer Jim.
Yes, McLaren appear to have the best car at the moment. Yes, both drivers have won a race each. Yes, it's all happy families with Zach, etc. But there needs to be a time when they pick one driver over the other in this championship. When might that be? Discuss.
It's early days, isn't it?
It's such early. I mean, we've only had 2.5 races, shall we say. It's too early to say. I'm sticking with my opinion that I think Oscar's still going to outdrive Lando. If I was the one that was picking, I would choose Oscar.
Okay.
But I also don't want to be that person to make that decision because that's so tough.
It is tough. And as you say, it's so early on in this series. We're a 24-race series. We've only had 2 of them so far in terms of the Grand Prix. And the battle, they've had a win each. So, yes, Oscar had that tough first weekend in Australia when it all went a little bit wrong for him in the damp conditions when he ran wide, made a mistake. but they are both showing such promise, such talent, both of them in slightly different ways. They're using each other as well. They're learning from each other, because they've both said that the other driver can sometimes be a bit quicker in certain corners, certain styles. They can study the data and learn from each other. So, it helps the team, but of course, it will come to a point where it's very difficult for the team to then imply some rules. There are already some rules that they've just got to give each other a bit of space, but they're allowed to go racing. And I think they have to be for this first part of the season.
But if it becomes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, how do you decide? Maybe they have to decide by doing something different, like a fight to the death.
It is a tough one. No, it's a really...
I don't know how to call this.
No, and we've seen it before, haven't we, with teams? Back in the days of McLaren, for example, when Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso were battling away for a championship, and then they lost out, and Kimi Räikkönen managed to sneak through and take the win. And funnily enough, China was a part of that, because Lewis had a bit of an error, partly because the team hadn't brought him in. He went off the track, and that sort of blew his chance to win the championship from the Chinese Grand Prix that year. But yeah, when you've got two top drivers and they're both fighting for the title, sometimes somebody can get nipped through in the middle, can't they?
Yeah, maybe a nice simple game of chess or drinking game or something might be fun.
Last
man standing gets to be driver number one. Producer Jim.
Which leads us on to my next discussion point, which is another strong performance from George Russell and Mercedes. Do you think they can gate crash the title battle?
Potentially. I think if there's going to be those battles up the top, if Oscar and Lando end up making little hiccups by racing each other so hard, then yeah, George could totally just swoop in and save the day. I mean, Kimi got driver of the day.
Yes. That's right. He did a great job as well. And Mercedes are looking pretty strong. I mean, George is saying that the McLaren is the better car at the moment. But what he's doing, that qualifying, I was very impressed. And, he changed completely his outlap on qualifying at the last moment. And he got it absolutely right, spot on. He's really pushing himself and the team, working really well with the team, I feel. And you're right. I think George could be, a bit like Kimi Räikkönen came through Alonso and Hamilton. George could be the one to come through. But Mercedes do need to pick up a little bit more pace with that car, generally, as we go through the year. They've got that capability. Don't forget, McLaren has Mercedes power in the back of it anyway, so they've got the same power units. It's a question of making the car just a little bit faster to make sure they can really challenge McLaren. But I think that is possible. So you're right. I think George could be a major contender. He got the 300th podium ever for the Mercedes team at the weekend. He's been on it with the 2 podiums. He's definitely on the case.
Jim?
Okay, spring, so it's time for Rookie Watch. Let's talk about Oliver Behrman's Grand Prix. What a drive. Ciao, ciao.
Can I own up to something? Because I know on last week's podcast, I said that I was going to hold on to Ollie Behrman in my fantasy team. And I ended up removing him. And I swapped him. I swapped him for Isaac Hadjar, which I thought was a really, really good shout. Turns out in the race strategy-wise, probably not the best idea. I'm still proud of my decision, but I'm a little bit gutted that he then performed really well this weekend. So I lost out on points. So I should have held on to him.
You should. Yeah, you were a bit unlucky on that, I should say, because Hadjar did a great job in qualifying.
Yeah.
Their strategy in the race didn't quite work out, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But Ollie Behrman was really good over the weekend. I was impressed with what he did. And when he had a tough Australia, it all went a bit wrong. He did manage to finish the race, no points scored. But I've really seen the talent in him. And it was lovely to see the fact that he came through so effectively. And then, of course, with some more disqualifications going on, he moved up even further up the order.
All I keep thinking of is, ciao. Ciao.
Yeah.
He said it to a few people. Who did he say it to? He said it to a few people, didn't he? I want to say a Ferrari.
There was a lot of overtaking going on, a lot of chowing.
A lot of chowing.
So anyway, let's talk about, speaking of which, we're 2 races in. I'm pretty much going to ask this every week. Pecking order until we know. What do we think? Has that changed? What are our feelings on the current pecking order?
Well, I mean, it's very clear that McLaren are going to take this whole entire season.
Really?
It's got to be.
Yeah, but you say that. But look at the Max's dominance he had in the early part of last season, only for McLaren to come along later in the season and then to win the Constructors. He still managed to win the Drivers' Championship, but they won the Constructors.
Yeah.
I feel, especially nowadays, there are 24 races in the F1 season. it can change, as you go through that long period. Shorter championship seasons in past years, maybe it can't change so much, but I do feel that's possible. But right now, there's no doubt, you're right, McLaren are the top team. It's looking quick, whether it's dry, wet, cold, warm. It does look as though the McLaren's got a lovely mix at this stage. But look at the Ferrari sprint win. I mean, that caught me out a little bit.
That was a curveball, wasn't it? Yeah.
That was a curveball. It was a brilliant effort by Lewis in qualifying.
Yeah.
They got it right, and he delivered a superb sprint race. And that's what I feel that this could happen, that there could be other changes. If Ferrari could just get themselves a little bit stronger, Mercedes just a bit stronger, and Red Bull always with the potential, as we know, with Max, we could get a complete change around.
Yeah, you're right. So we still can't call it yet. Give it a few more weeks and we'll come back to that question. That's what we'll do. Meanwhile, I'm assuming we've all looked on social media, and I'm assuming we've all seen that video of George Russell. Have you seen the video of George Russell, who has done an advert? He's done an advert for a German garden trimmer company.
I haven't seen that.
So it's all like German voiceover over the top. I'm pleading with you now, right? If you're listening to this or if you're watching this on YouTube, go onto Instagram because it will not let you down. It's a video that's doing the rounds of this advert that he's done, and it's so cheesy, but it's so George Russell. And he's basically just going around trimming some grass and trimming some bushes and basically doing an Edward Scissorhands to create a Formula One car. And then at the end, what's the quote at the end, Producer Jim?
It says, professional tool expert.
Yeah, George Russell.
That's fun.
Would anyone else do that ad apart from George? No one else on the grid would have done that ad. And I'm obsessed with it a little bit. So make sure you go on Instagram or go on YouTube or wherever and go and watch it. Oh, and while you're there, you can follow us on Instagram and you can make sure that you subscribe to this podcast. Thank you very much. Shall we introduce our guest?
Oh, yes. We've got a very special guest. A real pleasure to introduce someone who's been a reporter in the pit lane and presenting as well. It is Louise Goodman. Louise, it's lovely to have you with us here today. You've reported on some amazing times in Formula One, remarkable championship battles that have been going on. So what are your thoughts on what we're going into now in this 2025 season? We've already seen Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri up against each other.
I'm absolutely loving it. I was down in Australia, lucky enough to go down there every year. And there is a buzz around. I think coming off the back of last year when we had, 7 different winners across the season, really close championship. You've got regulations that really haven't changed much. So inevitably that closes it all up. And I think we are in for another stonking season. Bring it on.
Bring it on. Now, here's the thing. You're very much an inspiration to a lot of aspiring female motorsport presenters. So I'd love to know how you went from Louise Goodman to Louise Goodman on the telly.
I kind of fell into it, to be quite honest with you.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. I didn't really have a clue what I wanted to do work-wise. I knew I liked history, I liked English were my subjects at school, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I went travelling. While I was travelling, I met the editor of a powerboat racing magazine. And she offered me a job when I got back to the UK. So I started out, I learnt my journalism on the job, but there wasn't really such a thing as a journalism degree back in the day. You learnt it on the job. So went to work for this sort of small specialist magazine, ended up editing that. But whilst doing that, I was at a barbecue and I overheard, I know it's one of those stories, I heard a guy behind me saying that he was looking for somebody to come and work with him. He was just setting up a new company. I was looking to get an easier job because I wanted to get an evening job as well because I wanted to save up lots of money to go travelling again. So I said to this guy, sorry, excuse me interrupting, but I just heard you saying I've got secretarial skills. That guy was called Tony Jardine and he was just setting up a PR company. Tony had a background in motorsport. So I went to work for him and we launched Camel into Formula One. And then I went off on my travels. I met up with him again out in Australia, worked with him in Adelaide at the Grand Prix, and then I jumped back on a motorbike and carried on my travels. And then Tony contacted me via my parents and said, listen, when are you coming home? Because we need you back here. So I came back and started working for Tony. So that, like I say, I kind of fell into it. It was
good barbecue.
Yeah, really good barbecue. Yeah.
Fantastic stuff. And not long after that, you worked for Tony for a while, but then you ended up working for a great man who we've heard a huge amount about this week because it's very sad that we've lost Eddie Jordan. Yeah. He was a remarkable man, such a part of Formula One, and you worked directly for him.
I did. So as I mentioned, Camel was one of our clients at Jardine PR, and Camel sponsored EJ and when he had Eddie Jordan Racing in Formula 3000. So that was my entree to EJ, was when he was just starting. So we had a Lacey and Martin Donnelly were his two drivers. I very then quickly, another job came about, and I ended up working with BP and with the Leighton House team, but then cut forward a few years, and I went to work for Eddie again, actually at Jordan, when he'd set up the Formula One team by this point, so at the beginning of 1992. So went to work for EJ, yeah. And
there's been a lot of appreciation for him, hasn't there? It's been, I mean, such sad news, but also remarkable reading and watching some of what's come up as tributes to him. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Honestly, I think all entirely justified and everything. There's so much to say about EJ. There's so much you can't say about EJ because it's unbroadcastable. But he was an absolute joy to work with. He was one of those people. He could be totally exasperating at times, but life was never ever dull with EJ around. And everybody in that factory. I think I was employee number 47 when I joined Jordan Grand Prix, and every person in that factory would have gone to the ends of the earth for him, just because he was such a lovely guy to work for. When you work for Eddie, you became part of Eddie's extended family, and he knew everybody and he looked out for everybody, and he was such fun. You know, we had the work hard, play hard mentality. It was all rock and roll, and we used to joke about the fact. So Ian Phillips was the commercial director at the time, and I was the press officer. And we used to joke about, does he want to be rich today or does he want to be famous today? Because those were, kind of Eddie's favourite things. He liked being rich and he liked being famous. So who's going to have a busy day today? Is he going to focus on the money, or is he going to focus on the media side? Which for me as a press officer was brilliant, because I could come up with all sorts of different japes for us to do and PR stunts and all of that kind of thing. And Eddie was absolutely for it. Every now and then he'd say, I'm too busy, I can't do that. Good, but then, 5 minutes later, he's like, where's that journalist, Lou? Get him up here. And so he was just a joy.
It seems to be, everyone that I know that have spoken about him seems to mainly talk about his sense of fun. I never got the chance to meet him. I smiled at him and he gave me a little thumbs up in the paddock once. That's my extent of my relationship with him. But I know people that have said back at the British Grand Prix a couple of years ago, he was backstage dancing to the Black Eyed Peas and was just kind of like the life and soul of the party. And that's what I understand of him as a person.
Yeah, he always was. He loved being the centre of attention. And I don't mean that in a nasty way. People were drawn to him anyway, so he automatically became the centre of attention because he was such a larger than life figure. He loved people, be that an incredibly famous person, because he did like a famous person, but also, he would chat with absolutely anybody and everybody. So he had time for everybody.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating actually, because he went from running an F1 team to actually getting involved in TV like us. And Jim, our producer, Jim, you worked with him as well, didn't you?
Did, yeah.
So we all have our memories of him.
Yeah, uncontrollable.
Really?
From a producer's point of view, totally uncontrollable.
But in a fun way.
Yeah. In an amazing way. I loved his bits.
From a press officer's perspective, that was fun, but you never quite knew what was going to come out of his mouth. So, and if there were, I can remember always at our launches, he'd say, Lou, what am I saying? What am I saying? So you'd kind of run through, right, these are the key points. These are the things to get across. Yeah. But what am I saying? It's like, well, these are the key things to get. And he'd set off down a road and you think, where's he going with this? And he did it on TV as well, didn't he? He'd just set off. But eventually he would come around and get back to the point that was the point he needed to make. So Absolutely. Eddie just did everything Eddie's way.
Is there any sort of story that stands out to you that you're able to tell us?
There are lots of stories I can't tell about EJ, just because he was a man of his time. We were a little bit naughtier and ruder back in the day. But yeah, I mean, I was chatting with a friend this morning, and she told me a story. She said, I always love the story you told about the fact that Eddie lost his driving licence by in the space of a day, basically driving from his house to the factory and back again. There were 2 sets of speed cameras.
Oh right, yeah.
He went through them on the way to the factory, and he went through them on the way back from the factory again. So how many people would, get enough points over one day?
I was going to say that's a lot of points.
Isn't it? I think he got himself a driver after that, which I think he quite liked. It's quite nice driver.
I mean, that's got to be what That's 12. It's got to be 12 points, isn't it, when you lose your licence?
He probably had a few already.
Yeah, maybe.
But it certainly tipped him over the edge, yeah.
So obviously you were out in Australia for
Yes.
the Grand Prix a couple of weeks ago. How has Formula One changed to when you first started working in
It's
it?
unrecognisable. It really is unrecognisable. I mean, even I was at an event at Silverstone, the Grand Prix Mechanics Trust event at Silverstone a couple of months ago, and they had one of my inverted commas cars, the Leighton House, which was the first team that I worked with, that Capelli and Gugelmin drove. And, you know, you just look at that, and the fact that the car finishes like halfway down the driver's arms, just, you know, and they were literally head and shoulders out of the car. Everything is so different. The teams, the makeup of the teams. I was, you know, in the pit lane in Melbourne watching the Williams mechanics do a physical warm up before they did their pit stop practice. You know, all the heaviest lifting that the mechanics did in the morning back in the day was a pork sausage and, you know, chips for lunch. And it's just the level of everything has gone up enormously.
It's precision now, isn't it?
It's absolutely precision. And it's just expanded. There's so much more money, so much more marketing, so much more. The teams are all, like I said, I was employee number 47, and that was everybody. That was everybody at the factory making the cars, running the cars, you know.
And now it's well over 1,000, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's incredible.
It's probably got more than 47 people work in the Rebel catering department.
Yeah. No,
Wouldn't surprise me.
It's changed so much, hasn't
yeah.
it? Yeah. What about, what are you up to now? Because we work together on British touring cars, and I think you're still involved in that.
Still, I love the British touring cars.
Yeah, I love it
It's just
too,
the championship that keeps giving, it really is. You know, it's. I love Formula One, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But there does come a time when you get a little bit fed up with people saying you can't stand here, you've got to stand there. And you think, honestly, you know, in touring cars, we say jump and they say how high. It's an entertainment championship. The drivers of the teams are very aware of the fact that we are the oxygen that, you know, enables them to go racing. So they are so amenable to helping us out, to... and so it's just a totally different balance. We're a much bigger fish in a much smaller pond, covering the British Touring Car Championship. But also, it, without fail, you know, this season just gone, it came down to the very last race. There was 1 point separating two drivers. They were next to each other on the grid.
Oh.
That is how close that championship. It always goes down to the last weekend.
Yeah.
But this time it absolutely went down to the
It
wire.
did.
So, and it's just, I love it. Absolutely love it.
It does feel more accessible for fans as well. I know it's tricky as an F1 fan, even if you go to a Grand Prix weekend, of how close you can try and get to the track, or where you can go, where you're allowed to go, what you're allowed to see, that kind of thing. Whereas touring cars, it's kind of a free-for-all. You're in and you can go and watch for wherever you can.
We have our garages facing backwards effectively, so that rather than, you know, people seeing the back of the car or the back of the sort of, you know, the pit boardings that we have, that the cars are facing into the paddock, so that the public can walk past and
That's great.
see them operating and see them. So yeah, it's Alan Gower, who runs the championship, has done a brilliant job of it, and the teams all play ball.
So, I mean, if we've got lots of F1 fans that's listening or watching this podcast, what would you say to entice them into touring cars?
I would say IDV4, or get yourself down to a circuit, honestly, because the racing, and you'll back me up here, the racing is so close, it's so exciting, it's elbows out, it's a different style of racing, but, you know, so much overtaking, so much energy, so much, and some great rivalries and some great drivers. It's now become an aspirational championship as well. I think back in the day, I mean, obviously it went through an amazing time in the Super Tourer in the 90s, took a little bit of a dip, but, you know, had you asked a young racing driver 20 years ago, what did they want to do? They would all say Formula One. Nowadays, a lot of them know that Formula One is just, they're never going to make it. They don't have the financial wherewithal. So, you know, British Touring Car Championship is full of young, up-and-coming, brilliant drivers. We've got some amazing drivers in the BTCC.
It was great, actually. I saw you last year because I did Snetterton, commentating at Snetterton for the whole event, and it was just lovely to see you, and it was lovely to see British touring cars again, and the support races, as you say. They're a very good series, and as you say, fun to go along and watch and just be a part of it.
The other thing I love about it, as you say, the support races, we've obviously got British Formula 4 is on the bill. So, you know, I first met Lando, in fact, when he was racing in Ginetta Juniors as a 14-year-old. Oscar Piastri, I first met him when he was racing in British F4. I'm just trying to think who else has been through. That it's a championship that
Yeah.
a lot of young drivers will come through.
Yeah.
So we get to see them when they're a lot younger. There's all sorts of drivers racing in FIA F3, FIA F2 who've come up. Jack Doohan again is another driver who raced in a British F4. So lots of them coming up through the ranks have been on the BTCC bill.
Nicola, this is perfect timing for our next stage, actually, because we need to talk about some of these rookies, don't we?
Yes, we do. We need to talk about, it's going to break my heart. We need to talk about Liam Lawson. So I don't know if you know this, but I work with Red Bull. I host their podcast.
Yes.
And I get the opportunity of meeting the drivers, getting to know them. I've interviewed Max several times. I'm such a big fan of Max. I think he's absolutely wonderful and I think he's a brilliant driver. And I feel the same about Liam. I do. We were part of his announcement when they announced that he was going to be a Red Bull driver. And he's such a humble, lovely person. And I'm so gutted that for the first 2 races of the season, he's just not quite found his feet. And I don't know if it's just the fact that, the Red Bull car, is it just too difficult to get to grips with? But we saw him do some practice sessions last year and he seemed to be okay. And I don't quite know how to play this and I only want what's best for him. So what are your opinions on Liam?
I feel your pain.
Yeah.
He's a really, really nice guy.
Yeah.
Who's worked really hard. I mean, everybody who gets into a Formula One seat has worked their butt off to get there. So, and you don't suddenly forget how to drive.
No.
I mean, I kind of have to say, Red Bull, why can't you produce a car that 2 drivers can actually get the maximum? Maybe not the maximum. I accept that Max is a very special driver, but it's not the first time we've seen a driver struggling to drive the car in the way that Max, or to get the results, the speed and the performance from a car that Max can get from it.
Yeah.
So I kind of think you can't just stick him in that car, give him 2 races, throw him out again.
Yeah.
That's my view anyway. I accept that a driver has to perform.
Yeah.
And he, if you look at some of the things he's been saying this weekend, he's fully accepting of that as well.
Yeah.
But I just think you've got to help the guy, or you've got to look at what is the problem. We don't know what the problem is. But just looking from the outside, as I say, you don't, as a driver, suddenly forget how to drive.
As we create this podcast, we know that this is potentially up in the air, that Liam will be driving next time out in Japan. That decision may be made very soon. But I'm a bit mixed about that because Liam, he hasn't raced at Melbourne and Shanghai really before, but he has raced at Suzuka. He's raced in both Formula One and in Japanese Super Formula. He's had a pole in Super Formula there. If he doesn't get the chance to show what he could do at a circuit he really knows, I sort of feel for him. Although, I guess if it's a swap with Yuki Tsunoda, which is what's being talked about, and Tsunoda's doing a great job this year, then I guess you still get a chance because he might be in the Racing Bulls car. But, it's a challenging situation.
It's tricky because, we talk about the fact that he knows Suzuka better than most of the other tracks, but neither did the other rookies. They've never driven Australia. They'd never driven Shanghai.
Yeah.
But yet, even during qualifying, they were performing better. So it's got to be something really, really tricky within the car. I saw a quote from Max, and Max was saying, if Liam was in the Racing Bull, he would have been much faster because it's a much easier car to drive. So clearly it is a really tricky car. So how do they play it? Would it be better if Yuki's in that seat because he's a slightly more experienced driver and he might perform better?
It's a good question.
I don't know.
And it's very hard to know because as you were saying, Louise, the car is clearly a real challenge to drive. It suits Max, but we've seen Sergio Perez struggling with that car last year.
But he started off fine.
Yeah, he did start off fine. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Because actually, they both qualified well in Japan last time. And yes, it does seem a bit strange, but they do need 2 drivers who can back each other up. And it's just not happening for Red Bull at the moment. They need to make it work.
I go back to the point. I think they need to find out what it is in the car that makes it, we know Max is a special driver. Max can drive around things. I actually think if you put Yuki in that car at the Japanese Grand Prix, with all that pressure, all that visibility, is he suddenly going to be able to, be on a par with Max? I doubt it.
But he might be. And he might suddenly be amazing.
I genuinely
don't
think, he's 2 races into a car that Max says looks a better car than the one that he's driving. So I would imagine he's going to go backwards in terms of, and in front of, that home crowd, and with all that extra pressure of performing in front of a home crowd.
Yeah.
Then I think you've got 2 drivers who are in a situation where don't know whether they're coming or going, or so I say give them another chance.
We actually want to talk about Japan a bit more, because obviously that is coming up. It's not just about the Red Bull battle. It's about everything else that's going on. Louise, we both love that track, don't we? I mean, I've been there many times. It's a bit in the middle of nowhere. You're not next to a big Japanese city or anything, but the track itself, for me, for the drivers, is one of the great challenges.
Yeah, and you were a driver. So I get that.
Although I never
hear
raced
what
in
other
Japan.
drivers say.
I wasn't at that level to race there.
No, but I hear what, for me, it's the event. I
Okay.
can't really comment about it's an amazing track because I don't
Right.
drive around it, if you know what I mean. But I
Yeah.
think it's an amazing event. And, there's not a driver out there who doesn't love that circuit and love the challenge that it presents. And it's got some classic corners, but it's also got a fan base that knows and is passionate about Formula One. So
Yep.
it's got an amazing atmosphere. It's got all that history, all those events that have,
Yeah, hugely important, because often it's been at the end of the year and it's been
Yes.
the championship contender.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, when I first started commentating on Formula One, David Coulthard did drive me round a lap just to have a look at it. He was early
you get a
days.
hot lap?
It was early days for him as well. It wasn't a particularly hot lap, but it was a good chance to have a look at it. And of course, that was going into the 90s, and the late 90s when Mika Häkkinen won the championship for him twice for McLaren. He was McLaren driver by winning at Suzuka, because he was on the under pressure to whether he could win the championship. So McLaren and Suzuka have had some great history, although it's quite a long time. It was Jenson Button in 2011, I think, who last won Suzuka for McLaren. So how that's going to work is, we think McLaren are obviously going to be right up there again, but it's going to be fascinating.
Well, it's Red Bull that's got a decent history now with Suzuki.
You're right.
So
Recently.
who knows? So here is where we're going to start bringing up our championship of the world.
Oh my goodness.
Now, big dramas from last week. So
I'm feeling the pressure already.
Well,
I've seen the stats.
yeah, Vicky Butler-Henderson set the bar. And then Colin Furze came in last week and absolutely smashed it. Got P1, P2, P3 absolutely spot on. So he went Oscar, Lando, George. So currently, as it stands in our championship, the guest is in P1. So the guest is in P1 with 14 points, because Colin Furze actually got 12 points from last week.
Brilliant.
Which
You did
is
really well.
bonkers.
That makes me feel better. So VBH only got 2.
Yes.
Okay. That makes me feel a little bit better.
Well, then currently in second place is producer Jim.
Hey, well done, Jim.
Woo! Because you got the McLarens in the right order from last week. Well done, well done. In P3 is me. Very proud of me, only because I guessed Oscar right, and that's me. So I've got 6 points.
Okay.
And Ben, you're now in last place. I'm afraid you've got 3 points. You literally
Yeah.
went from second to last, but you got the George Russell right.
Yeah, I did. In my order, I thought it was going to be Lando, Oscar, and of course it wasn't that
Yeah.
order. No.
And also fastest lap, we got a little bit confused by, but actually with all of our predictions doesn't change anything. But technically Lewis got the fastest lap, but because he was disqualified, we don't think he got that. So,
Yeah.
but it doesn't matter because no one said Lewis, so it's fine. And no one said Lando, so it's fine.
Yes.
So we need your prediction ahead of Japan, please.
I've got a bit of history when it comes to predictions, and it's not good history. we used to have a sweepstake when I was doing the pit lane for ITV and F1, and I always used to go with my heart. And it was the time that Michael Schumacher was winning everything, and he was never my go-to driver with the heart. So I'm rubbish at this, is basically what I'm saying. I'm getting my excuses in early doors. I think predictions, you can't move too far away from the McLarens, can you, at the moment?
Or can you? Who
Well,
knows?
no, you can't. I don't think. Well, you could. You'd either look very clever or very silly.
Yeah.
And I suspect it would be more on the silly thing. So I'm going to go with the McLarens. I'm going to go Oscar.
Oh,
I think he's just going to be on a bit of a roll at the moment.
Okay.
Lando had a couple of tricky moments across this past weekend, didn't he? So,
Yeah.
So Oscar's tail is going to be held high. I'm going to go Lando second. You see, my heart says I'm just going to go with my heart.
Do it.
George.
You're going George.
George.
Well, because I'd like him to.
3 podiums in a row. Yeah. Yeah.
It'd be really lovely.
So you're going for same result as
Yeah.
China?
Sorry, that's really boring.
And
isn't
fastest
it?
lap.
Oh, fastest lap. I don't know. Lando.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, he may well.
Solid.
do. Yeah.
Just because his name came into my head.
Yeah.
Of no other reason.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Ben.
Okay, I mean, I'll probably get this completely wrong again, but I think I'm going to go for Oscar for the win, because I do think he's in a very confident mode at the moment. But I also think that China, the track doesn't suit Lando as well as some other places. Lando may well come back very strong, but I'll go for Oscar Piastri first. I think something might happen. You never know, it might be incidents. There might even be some rain at this time of year in Japan. I don't know, it could be anything. I'm going to go for a slightly odd mixture. I'm going to go second for Hamilton.
Oh!
Yeah. And third for Verstappen, and I'm going to go for fastest lap for Norris, where something will have happened to him where he was quick, but something he didn't get in the top three. It's a silly judgment, but I'll give it a go.
Interesting. Okay. Producer Jim, or do you want to go me first? Me first, okay. P1 Max. Now, this is not because I have a contract with Red Bull.
Suzuka.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Fourth in a row.
No, I didn't say Max for P1 last week. I said P2 for Max.
No, absolutely.
This is purely
But
because...
Suzuka, he's won the last three, hasn't he?
Thank you very much. Exactly my theory.
I thought Oscar was your boy earlier on.
Well,
Now suddenly it's all Max, is it?
well, Max is always up there for me.
Okay.
But it's not because I have a contract with Red Bull.
Yes, it
So,
is.
no, it's not. It's because I think he's brilliant. And I think he's now on... race? It'll be race 3.5 for him. He'll be finding his feet, even though he's technically in like the fourth fastest car. He's still an amazing driver. He'll be feeling confident. I think he's going to go out there and smash it. They've got a week and a half to do some tweaks on the car. I feel like he's going to come
You're
back
taking
strong.
on my game with the heart thing, aren't you?
Yeah.
I hope it's more successful for you than it was for me.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So I'm going P1 Max, P2 Oscar,
Yeah.
because I do think Oscar's going to outdrive Lando. P3 George.
Okay, yep.
And fastest lap, I'm going to throw out a curveball, because I did a curveball last week. It didn't work out for me, but it was a curveball last week because I thought it was going to be Kimi, but it wasn't. My fastest lap this week, or for Japan, I think is going to go to Yuki.
Yuki Tsunoda.
Home
that's
race.
fun.
Yeah.
That'd be nice.
And because we all love Yuki.
Yeah,
So
great.
I just feel like it feels right. Just feels right.
What, another Red Bull driver?
It's not because I have a contract with Red Bull.
He might be. Yeah, he might well be.
Okay, so I'm going to go for Lando, because I think he'll be stewing from Shanghai and his technical gremlins that cost him the chance to have a go at Oscar. I'm going to go Max second, because Suzuka traditionally over the last, in this regulations, has been very good for Red Bull.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go Oscar third, Hamilton fastest lap.
Hamilton fastest lap. Interesting. So we're all thinking Lewis being up there is quite interesting. I mean, seeing him in the sprint race last week, he's clearly finding his feet. It was just a bit of a shame what happened in the actual race. But knowing that he won the sprint, he's got it in him. It's possible, right?
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, sorry, I don't mean to be rude. I think we knew he had it in him.
No, in a Ferrari, I mean, not so much in him.
Well, that's the bit I question, actually, because I think, yes, I think the sprint was a very nice result, great result, but even he was surprised. So I don't think it's going to be like that when we get that car. Just doesn't seem to be where it needs to be quite yet.
Interesting. Did you hear Bono, which was Lewis's former engineer, accidentally calling Kimi Lewis?
Yes.
So Lewis, Kimi.
Kimi.
So there we go. Right, there are our predictions. No pressure, but team guests seem to be smashing it at the moment. But if you mess it up, then it's all your fault.
Yeah.
So.
Honestly, I'll take that one on the chin. Like I say, I have form when it comes to messing up predictions. So
there we go. Looking ahead to Japan.
Absolutely. Yep. No, it's going to be great. And of course, we'll have all the stories when we're ready to see what has happened in Japan.
Yeah.
We'll be able to bring you all the information that we can here on the podcast.
And don't forget, if you are listening to the podcast, then click follow and tell your friends. If you're watching on YouTube, then make sure you subscribe. And hey, if you've got your own predictions ahead of Japan, then put it in the comments section below, because it's all good for the algorithm.
And Louise, thank you so much for joining us.
my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, there's now a thing, which has now become a thing on this podcast, that every guest that comes on has to finish with either an interesting fact or like a stupid story or something like that. So what you got?
Well, I thought, given the circumstances, I had to go with an EJ story. And as I mentioned earlier on, it's quite tricky to come up with EJ stories that you can actually tell, because a lot of them involve swearing or things that shouldn't be happening. But I did think of one It's kind of half fact and half story, but it absolutely sums EJ up. So everybody remembers the first Jordan car, the 191, as being a beautiful, legendary car. That car was originally going to be the 911 because it was 1991 and it was the first chassis. 911, 911.
Yes, that's something we know from Porsche.
So Eddie got a phone call from Porsche saying, excuse me, I think you'll find we've already got a car called a 911, a 911, so you can't have that. So Eddie agreed to change it to the Jordan. So that's how it became the Jordan 191. But he only agreed to change it on the basis that they gave him a Porsche car to use for a year. And it took them, I think, 3 years to get the keys back.
Was it a 911? That he got?
You know what, I can't remember.
It must have been.
I'm sure it was. But the fact that he kept hold of it for 3 years and they'd send somebody to pick it up and he wasn't there and he'd have it hidden around the back. And
I love it.
Yeah. That absolutely summed EJ up. An eye for a deal and an eye for a hustle.
3 years of a free car. Do you think he did that maybe they did that on purpose? If we call it a 911, I might get a free car out of it.
No, but I think once it had been pointed out to him, he thought, aha,
yeah,
here's an opportunity.
Cha-ching!
Memories of Eddie Jordan.
Yeah.
Very important.
Very
and
special man.
Great thoughts to his family as well.
And don't forget to subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, then click the sub button. And if you've got any predictions ahead of the next race, put it in the comment section below. If you're listening wherever you get your podcasts, click follow and we'll see you next time.